Just hours ago, the most powerful military machine in human history watched as their ultimate strategic leverage evaporated into the humid air of the Persian Gulf. Despite the absolute wreckage left behind by Operation Epic Fury, 50 million barrels of Iranian oil are currently flooding into the global market at this very moment. While the Trump administration is taking victory laps for what they call the total destruction of Iran's military infrastructure, a massive economic blood transfusion is happening right under their noses. The victory party in Washington is not just premature, it is dangerously delusional. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what just happened, why the White House never saw this counter-move coming, and why the geopolitical map you're looking at today looks fundamentally different from the one you woke up in a week ago. You are going to see how the architecture of global power just shifted beneath your feet, while the mainstream media was busy focusing on the spectacle of the smoke. We are moving into a new reality where military dominance no longer translates to economic control. To understand the sheer scale of the deception currently unfolding in Qatar, I want you to imagine you have a business partner who refuses to look you in the eye or even enter the same room as you. You have just spent months trying to bankrupt him. While you sit at the head of the conference table waiting to sign a final settlement, this partner is in the back office liquidating every shared asset you own. He is selling the furniture and the intellectual property to your biggest rivals while you wait for a handshake. That is exactly the dynamic Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are facing in Doha right now, and the implications for your wallet are staggering. The Iranians are refusing to speak directly to the American envoys, using Qatari and Pakistani intermediaries as a human shield for their true intentions. Hold that thought, because that is precisely what the Iranian technical delegation just did to the United States on the world stage. Before we go any deeper, I need you to weigh in on a massive dilemma facing the National Security Council. Should the U.S. release the $6 billion in frozen Iranian assets as a show of good faith, or is that just pouring gasoline on a fire that is already out of control? Drop your answer in the comments right now. The situation is reaching a boiling point because the 60-day clock established by the June Memorandum of Understanding is ticking towards zero. While Vice President J.D. Vance claims the U.S. holds all the cards, the reality on the water tells a much darker story. Since the naval blockade was lifted following the 38-day war, the Iranian state has been exporting oil at a rate that defies every intelligence projection. Chief negotiator Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf recently boasted of 40 million barrels, but our tracking sources suggest the number is closer to 50 million. This is not just a leak in the sanctions regime, it is a structural collapse of the entire American leverage strategy. High global oil prices, ironically caused by the war itself, are now funding the rapid reconstruction of the very state the U.S. just tried to dismantle. In the luxury suites of Doha, the American envoys are finding out that destroying a nuclear facility with a B-2 bomber is much easier than stopping the flow of global capital. The technical delegation from Tehran is playing a masterclass in diplomatic obstruction while their tankers move the lifeblood of the global economy. They are exploiting a gap in the ceasefire agreement that Washington assumed would be a period of Iranian submission. Instead, Mojtaba Khamenei, the hardline successor to his father, is proving that the death of a leader does not mean the death of a strategy. The world is watching the Doha theater with bated breath as the American delegation tries to force a face-to-face meeting that the Iranians simply do not want. It is a humiliation being broadcast in real time to every capital from Beijing to Moscow. The U.S. thought they had broken the back of the Islamic Republic during Operation Epic Fury by obliterating their ballistic missile industry, but they forgot one crucial rule of the high-stakes game. Leverage is not just about what you can destroy, it is about what you can still sell. As the sun sets over the Persian Gulf, the shadow of these tankers grows longer, reaching all the way to the gas pumps in Middle America. Every barrel sold is another brick in a wall that the Trump administration thought they had permanently knocked down. The transition from total war to this fractured peace has created a vacuum that the Iranians are filling with cold, hard cash. This is the Doha deception, and it is only the first layer of a much larger plan to rewrite the rules of the Middle East. The American envoys are beginning to realize that the total victory they promised the public is slipping through their fingers like sand. The 60-day window is not a period of Iranian surrender. It is a countdown to a new kind of confrontation. While Kushner and Witkoff wait for a message from the Qatari Prime Minister, the Iranian state is rebuilding its treasury and its influence. They are turning a military defeat into a structural victory that will haunt Washington for decades to come. This is not a temporary setback. It is a fundamental shift in how power is exercised in the 21st century. The architecture of the old world is crumbling, and the new one is being funded by the very resources the U.S. tried to keep under lock and key. The stage is set for a showdown that goes far beyond the borders of Iran or the meeting rooms of Qatar. As we look at the data, the true extent of the miscalculation becomes clear, and it points back to a series of events that changed everything. To truly understand why we are standing on the edge of a global energy crisis, we have to flip back the pages of history to the moment the structure of power in the Middle East fundamentally fractured. Let's turn back the calendar to February 2026, when the pillars of the old world began to crumble under the weight of Operation Epic Fury. Washington believed that by taking out the head of the snake, the body would naturally wither and die. On February 28, 2026, a precision strike ended the era of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, leaving a power vacuum that many in the West expected to lead to a democratic spring. They were wrong. Instead of a collapse, we witnessed the rise of Mojtaba Khamenei and the implementation of what we now identify as the octopus strategy. Mojtaba didn't try to maintain the rigid, centralized command of his father. He understood that a single point of failure makes a regime vulnerable to B-2 Spirit bombers and bunker buster technology. He decentralized the entire axis of resistance, granting autonomous, lethal independence to every proxy node from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. When the central command was struck, the tentacles didn't retract. They became more aggressive, more unpredictable, and far more difficult to negotiate with. I have the proof of this structural shift right here in 3 specific data points that Washington is currently trying to hide behind a wall of diplomatic, optimistic rhetoric. Let's look at the facts. They don't want you to connect. Evidence number 1 is the massive economic blood transfusion currently flooding Tehran's depleted coffers. Despite the severe military damage sustained in the 38-day war, Iran is proving that cash is the ultimate survival tool. In the mere 14 days since the U.S. naval blockade was lifted, Tehran hasn't just exported oil, they have surged over 50 million barrels onto the global market. They are pumping crude at a rate that defies every remaining sanction on the books. Think about the irony here. The very war intended to starve the regime of cash drove global oil prices so high that Iran is now rebuilding its entire treasury in a matter of weeks. By the time the DOHA negotiations conclude, Iran will have more liquid capital than they did before the first bombs fell in Operation Midnight Hammer. This isn't just a recovery, it is a tactical reload financed by the very markets that sought to crush them. Evidence number 2 moves from the counting rooms to the most critical choke point on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran has officially tabled a proposal for mandatory transit fees for every single vessel passing through these waters. This isn't a voluntary service charge like you see in the Malacca Strait. This is an aggressive claim of absolute sovereignty over a 33-kilometer bottleneck that handles 20% of the world's oil supply. If you want your tankers to move through the Gulf, Mojtaba Khamenei is demanding a direct cut of your bottom line. He is effectively taxing global energy consumption to pay for his military's reconstruction. Japan, China, and India are the most exposed to this leverage. They are realizing that their energy security now depends on the signature of a man Washington claimed was defeated months ago. Evidence number 3 is the total collapse of the 14-point Trilateral framework intended to neutralize Hezbollah in Lebanon. While American envoys were still celebrating the ink drying on the June 26th agreement, the octopus was already moving to veto it. Hezbollah MP Hassan Fadlallah has flatly called the deal treasonous, asserting that the group will hold their weapons tighter than ever before. They have no intention of honoring the disarmament clauses signed by the Lebanese state. This creates a lethal trap for the Lebanese armed forces. If they try to enforce the agreement, they risk a total internal splintering and a return to the dark days of civil war. If you're seeing these patterns while the rest of the world is distracted by the spectacle of the Doha meetings, then you are already thinking several moves ahead of the average observer. You're beginning to see the architecture of the new multipolar reality. Hit the subscribe button right now because Nane is the only place tracking the structural shifts that the mainstream media won't touch until the consequences are irreversible. You are part of an elite group that demands to see the hidden machinery of power. So what does this actually mean for you and your personal financial security? It means that the era of cheap, predictable energy is officially over, replaced by a permanent geopolitical tax dictated by Tehran. As these new transit fees and supply routes become the new normal, the inflation you feel at the pump and the grocery store will no longer be a temporary spike. It is becoming a structural reality of the 2026 economy. Washington believed they held all the cards because of their military superiority, but they forgot that power isn't just about who has the biggest bombs. It's about who controls the flow of resources and who can survive the longest in a fractured landscape. The 60-day clock is ticking toward a mid-August deadline that nobody is ready for. We are rapidly approaching the moment where the side with the most structural pain will be forced to make a choice that changes everything. But the most dangerous part of this calculation isn't the oil or the money. It's the trap that has been set in the mountains of Lebanon, where a reverse Camp David strategy is about to blow up in Washington's face. Washington is attempting to play a 1970s diplomatic hand in a 2026 reality. The 14-point Trilateral framework was designed to do to Hezbollah what the Camp David Accords did to Egypt. By severing the strongest node of the resistance from Tehran, the administration hoped to create a buffer zone that would secure northern Israel permanently. But there is a structural flaw in this architecture that no one in the White House wants to admit. In 1978, Anwar Sadat was the state, and the Egyptian military followed his command without question. Today in Lebanon, the state is a ghost, and the Lebanese armed forces are an empty shell held together by American funding and fragile internal compromises. If the LAF attempts to enter the southern pilot zones to disarm the resistance, they will not be acting as a peacekeeping force. They will be triggering a civil war that would make the 1975 conflict look like a rehearsal. Hezbollah MP Hassan Fadlallah has already made the stakes clear, calling the framework a treasonous document. They are not preparing to step back. They are preparing to hold their positions with more lethality than ever before. Trace the timeline back to the end of Operation Epic Fury in April. Washington believed that the death of the supreme leader and the destruction of Iran's navy meant the game was over. They assumed that once the head of the octopus was bruised, the tentacles would simply go limp. Instead, we are seeing a mutation into a decentralized network where each proxy operates with total local autonomy and survival instincts. Proof point number 1, the official declaration from Speaker Nabi Berri rejecting the disarmament clause. This isn't just rhetoric, it is a signal that the Lebanese political class cannot and will not enforce the U.S. mandate. Proof point number 2, the movements of the Lebanese armed forces. Despite the agreement, LF commanders are quietly signaling that they will not engage in kinetic operations against Hezbollah units in the south. Proof point number 3, the global shipping insurance market. Lloyd's of London has not lowered the risk premiums for the Eastern Mediterranean despite the peace deal because the market knows this framework is built on sand. If this analysis is connecting the dots that the mainstream media is too afraid to touch, then you are already seeing the world more clearly than most. You are watching the end of an era in real time, so hit subscribe right now to stay ahead of the curve here on Jomjar Nain. So what does this actually mean for you and your family's bottom line? We are looking at a permanent shift in the cost of global energy and logistics. If Lebanon splinters, the instability will radiate through the Suez Canal and across the Mediterranean. This isn't just about politics. It is about the price of every gallon of gas and every shipping container moving from east to west. We are now facing 3 distinct paths as we approach Day 61 of the Doha Memorandum. Scenario 1 is the managed de-escalation where the Trump administration blinks first. To prevent a total regional explosion, Washington releases the $6 billion in frozen Iranian assets as a face-saving gesture. This allows the 60-day window to be extended, but it proves to the world that Iran's economic leverage is stronger than U.S. kinetic power. Scenario 2 is the regional realignment that should keep every strategist in Washington awake at night. In this path, China finally breaks its silence and officially backs Iran's mandatory transit fees for the Strait of Hormuz. This would create a new multipolar reality where the U.S. Navy no longer guarantees freedom of navigation. Instead, global trade would be governed by a Tehran-Beijing axis, fundamentally ending the era of American maritime hegemony. Scenario 3 is the spiral that no one wants to name out loud. The LAF attempts to enforce the framework, the army splits along sectarian lines, and Lebanon collapses into a multi-sided furnace of violence. This would force the U.S. to choose between watching its reverse Camp David burn or being dragged back into a ground war in the Levant. Once these structural alliances fracture, they do not magically return to the old status quo. The new routes and the new risks become the new normal for the global economy. Does military power actually have the capacity to dictate economic reality in a multipolar world? Or have we reached the limit of what bombs can achieve? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments, especially on whether you think the U.S. will release that $6 billion. I read every single comment to see how you're processing this shift. This content is commentary and analysis for informational purposes only. It does not constitute financial, legal, or geopolitical advice. Stay frosty, and I will see you in the next one.